This is Dr. Sanchez. This is a presentation about technology perspectives and artificial intelligence. We're going to build a conceptual framework for the study of technology, but specifically for artificial intelligence. Before we talk about AI, we need to talk about how societies understand technology, because how we frame technology shapes how we design it, how we teach it, how we use it, and how we critique it. So this week we're covering 5 major perspectives: techno-determinism, utopian views of technology, Luddites, sociotechnical systems, and social informatics. By taking all 3 of these together, we can look at how technology relates to people and how people relate back to technology and institutions, that they all interact with each other. 3 of the key frames that we need to keep in mind, 3 of the main points, is that technology is never neutral. People, systems, culture, and institutions shape outcomes, and that these perspectives help us analyze AI critically. So I'm not here to give you an opinion about AI. My goal is to offer you, as information scholars, multiple perspectives from which to analyze AI. Now, regardless of your personal feelings, it's a tool you're going to be using if you're not already using it in your workplace. Many of the software system that you currently use, from Spotify to anything in Adobe, even some of the courseware systems like Brightspace and course registration systems, they're all using pieces of AI or even generative AI. It's being used to process even things like archival material at the University of Texas, because they don't have the human labor available to process the warehouses full of data. So if AI wasn't used to process this archival material, the items would still be sitting in untouched boxes same boxes they've been in for over 50 years, because they don't have the human labor to process those. So over those 50 years, more and more documents just keep piling up and piling up, creating a backlog that the archival team would never be able to process. So by using AI to process that data, is that a good use of AI? Is it an ethical use of AI? Let's start with techno-determinism, sometimes called technological determinism. This is the belief that technology drives history all by itself, that we're simply reacting to the inevitable technological change. Just, future technology is just on the march. The future and tech are just instantly merged together. So you'll hear phrases like AI will replace all jobs, the internet will democratize information, technology improves learning. These statements assume that technology is the active force and that people are passive. The problem is that its deterministic thinking removes human agency, right? How we can control things. And it ignores institutions, it ignores policy, inequity, labor, culture, all the things that actually shape what technology does in the real world. So for libraries, this often shows up in vendor marketing that promises AI will revolutionize discovery or fix biases automatically. So if you only take one thing from this lecture, technology doesn't shape society alone. Society shapes technology. And underneath these slides, you'll see the references from where I'm pulling this information from. I'm not just making this all up. And I'll have a citation sheet at the end posted in Brightspace for you. So let's look at the smartboard failure as a nice anecdote of techno-determinism. So a school superintendent proudly announced he was fixing education by putting smartboards in every classroom. Millions of dollars are spent. There's a massive rollout. There's ribbon cuttings and even local news coverage. But 6 months later, most smartboards are still being used as expensive projector screens. Teachers hadn't been trained, curricula weren't adapted, and the district hadn't budgeted for replacement bulbs or software updates. When the superintendent was asked why test scores hadn't improved, he said, "Technology changes everything. We just need more of it." And that's a classic techno-determinism, right? Where the belief that the technology alone, just by putting the technology in the classroom, is going to increase your grade scores. It's going to make people learn. So it's not the training, it's not the pedagogy, it's not about institutional support or human behavior, right? But the technology alone is what's going to transform society. So techno-determinism is technology without transformation, right? Because context really matters when we're talking about technology adoptions, particularly AI. So let's look at utopian views of technology. I think Star Trek is a perfect example of the utopian view of technology. In the Star Trek society, there's so much technology that people don't have to work. They just work because they want to. They chase their natural human motivations to do better because everything's already provided for. That's like the entire basis of Star Trek. So the utopian view of technology is the classic Silicon Valley narrative that technology is the liberator, right? Technology is liberation. So techno-utopian, it imagines digital tools as inherently progressive. They expand access, they reduce inequality, and they promote participation. And you've seen this in slogans like information wants to be free, or promises that innovation will solve a complex social problem. In libraries, we hear this too. Like AI is going to democratize access, or automation gives us more time for real work, or data-driven tools will eliminate human error. The challenge is that utopian narratives, they ignore history. And as students of information, we know that technology amplifies existing social structures. It doesn't erase our current social structures. So for libraries, this often shows up in vendor marketing that promises that AI is going to revolutionize discovery or it's going to fix your biases automatically. And once again, if you only take one thing from the lecture, it's that technology doesn't shape society alone. Society shapes technology. Let's look at a utopian narrative in libraries. So the utopian narrative is that AI discoverability is going to solve access issues. That if we use AI the proper way, the people are going to be able to find things much easier. They're going to be able to access things from anywhere. And that automation creates more time for meaningful work. Well, we know that isn't true historically because we've automated the workplace and we're still working 40 hours a week or more than 40 hours a week. We've added computers to many processes and all it's done is create different types of labor for us. It doesn't make less labor. We just do a different type of labor. Another one is that algorithms will correct cataloging bias. The cataloging biases that are frequently done now by humans. They're thinking that algorithms might be able to fix that, but of course they can't because humans create the algorithms. And if humans create the algorithms and humans are currently creating catalog bias, that bias is going to fall into the algorithm that gets created. Another one is that tech expands equity automatically. And we know that tech doesn't expand equity. Tech just amplifies the current social problems and social dynamics that we already have. So the reality where I like to push back against utopian narratives is that the context actually determines the impact, not the technology. So here's a utopian view of technology, is that the internet will end inequality. And on the right-hand side, you can see a picture of Bill Clinton and Al Gore building the internet superhighway during the 90s. So in the mid-90s, a group of activists in California created a public access computer lab. They believe that the internet would dismantle hierarchies, it would liberate information and create global understanding. One of the founders said, once everyone is online, racism and inequality will wither away. People just need information. Right? And of course, we know that isn't true when we look at social media now, that technology really just amplified people's racism. Technology amplified inequality by creating things such as the digital divide, and that all of our social problems didn't wither away with more access to information or more access to technology. So 10 years later, the lab shuts down. Why? Well, the wealthier residents already had broadband at home, so they didn't need to go to the community lab. The poorer residents, they lacked transportation to get to the lab. And the most popular sites, they weren't political forums about, overcoming inequality or, anything like that. It was about people wanted websites about gaming. They wanted websites about entertainment. It wasn't for politics. And then they saw that harassment and hate speech in the community actually rose up through the computer lab. So the dream wasn't foolish. It was utopian, right? And there's nothing wrong with having aspirations to do these things, but by thinking that the technology alone, by just putting the technology in people's hands, isn't going to necessarily fix anything. So they imagine technology as inherently democratizing without considering the social, the economic, and the cultural structures that shape access and participation. Let's look at the Luddites, the real story of the Luddites. So most people use Luddite to mean anti-technology or being nostalgic for the past. But historically, the Luddites were skilled workers who smashed machines because the owners were using those machines to exploit laborers and destroy working class livelihoods. They weren't anti technology, they were anti exploitation. So, modern Luddite thinking is very relevant to AI. It focuses on worker autonomy, ethical resistance, and the social harm that gets caused by unregulated technology. In other words, critical tech resistance isn't ignorance, it's expertise plus ethics. So, some of the modern Luddite themes that we'll see is worker autonomy, algorithmic exploitation, the hidden labor behind smart technology, and having ethical resistance and governance towards a technology, particularly here towards AI. So the Luddites, let's talk about the Weavers' Night Strike. So these are the textile weavers of Nottingham. So when the stocking frames, this is a way of doing a manufacturer's weaving. When they were first introduced in the 1800s, many weavers in Nottingham noticed that factory owners using the machines to drive the wages down. One owner installed wide frame machines that produced cheaper stockings at a lower quality, and then he slashed the workers' pay because he had this machine to kind of amplify their work. So the weavers protested. The owner fired them, locked the doors, and then hired untrained laborers to do their work. So one night, under the cover of darkness, the skilled weavers broke into the factory and smashed the wide frames. But they left a note. We destroy machines that destroy our craft. We're not against technology, we're against its misuses. And this is the true spirit of Luddism. It's resistance to exploitative uses of technology, not resistance to technology itself. So let's look at STS, or sociotechnical systems. So one of the most important lenses that you'll use in this course, and that information science particularly uses, is sociotechnical systems. So the sociotechnical view says that technology can't be separated from people, institutions, workflows, and culture. So a library integrated library system, an ILS, it's not just software. It's the catalogers themselves, it's the metadata standards, it's the library policies, it's the vendor decisions, it's the budgets, it's the student needs, and also accessibility concerns, all wrapped up into one system. Whereas other technological views will view an ILS as just software, but people coming from the socio-technical system will view it as software plus your policies, software plus your budget, software plus your accessibility. All these things as one need to be looked at and managed together, not separately. So when you bring AI into the picture, it's even more complex because it's going to include the model, the training data, the unseen labor of the annotators, the platform rules, the institution that deploys it, and the students who use it. So a socio-technical system, it's an ecosystem. It's not just a tool. It's not just the software or the technology. So if we look at examples of socio-technical systems, we already talked about the ILS, but let's look at learning management systems. So something like Brightspace. Brightspace isn't just the software, but in this view, it's the instructor, it's the students, it's the registrar, it's the policies for registration, it's financial aid and how that may cause a block or a hold on somebody's courses. All these things get put together when you analyze whether a software was a success or not. We can also look at AIs plus vendors plus training data plus the labor. And in socio-technical systems, we evaluate the system, not just the isolated tools, because you can't separate people from institutions, from workflows, and culture. So here's a story about the unused self-checkout. So a public library proudly installed a set of sleek, modern self-checkout stations, and the staff were told that it would free them from the repetitive task of having to check people out of the library when they're checking out a book. 3 months later, the usage was almost zero. So a consultant observed the patrons for a week and discovered that the stations were placed too far from the circulation desk. Seniors weren't sure whether they needed staff permission to use the machines. Parents with kids didn't want to split their attention between taking care of their kid and facing the machine to check out. The screen font was too small for a lot of people. And then the staff felt awkward telling people to go use the machine instead of using them. They felt like they were passing their work off. Once the librarian walked over and said, "Let me show you how this works," the usage spiked. So the lesson was that the success depended on the layout, the signage, the training, the social norms, the staff behavior, the patron confidence. It wasn't about the machines or how well the machines were designed, right? And that is the sociotechnical system when you combine all of those things into one. So the last view that we want to talk about is social informatics. Social informatics is the study of the social aspects of computerization. It teaches us that tech outcomes depend on the context of the situation, that the tech produces unintended consequences usually. You can't plan or guess what's going to happen once you put technology into the social sphere. The technology is shaped by power, and it's also shaped by institutions. And then more technology isn't always a better solution. And this is the lens that we'll use throughout the course when we're evaluating artificial intelligence. So when a vendor proposes an AI-powered discovery layer, we're not just asking, does this work? We're asking, who benefits? Who's burdened? What values are embedded in the system? And what social dynamics are going to shape its use? And that's social informatics thinking. And a good example is the invention of the iPhone. So the iPhone gets created, and when it gets put into people's hands, a lot of the societal changes that have occurred because of the power of having a computer in your pocket were unintended consequences of the tool that nobody could have predicted. So when social informatics is in practice, we really want to know like who benefits from the tool, who's going to be burdened by the tool, what values are embedded in the system, and what labor is going to be required to sustain it. And that's a big one for libraries, is technology will get integrated into a system, but we don't have the staff to maintain it. For example, I had a grant a couple of years ago where I was able to buy 20 Mac Pros laptops for students taking my multimedia production class. So I have the laptops, but we lost one of our IT workers. So now not only am I having to design the course, but now I have to maintain 20 laptops, which means erasing them after every class, keeping them all updated, keeping them charged, keeping the plugins on, and cleaning the screens, boxing them up, wrapping the cords, right? All this extra labor that is an unintended consequence of writing a grant to get these computers. So it's just things to keep in mind, that more tech isn't always better. What's the labor required to sustain something, and so forth. So social informatics, this is a story about the help desk that nobody called. So a university launched a 24/7 library IT helpline. On paper, it's a great idea. The students can call anytime for assistance with databases or citations or login issues or asking about research tools. But the phone barely rang. So a social informatics researchers interviews the students, and he finds that students preferred asking librarians they recognized. Many of them didn't want to bother somebody, so they want to pick up the phone and call. Some of them were feared about sounding dumb on the phone, asking questions about something that they didn't know how to do. Others didn't know what kinds of questions were appropriate and what kind of questions weren't. The international students were worried about speaking English on the phone. And then many believed that the service was just kind of for emergencies only. And the researcher concluded that the problem wasn't the technology, it was the social norms. The problem was the identity and trust of the users. It had nothing to do with the technology itself. But that shows the interplay between society and technology and how the two can sometimes clash. And that's social informatics. That technology practices are shaped by people, they're shaped by culture, they're shaped by relationships and the institutional context, not just the technical capacity. So when we bring it all together, these perspectives, techno-determinism, utopianism, the Luddite critique, sociotechnical systems, and social informatics, they're the foundation for understanding AI ethically and realistically. And if we only listen to deterministic or utopian narratives, we end up accepting AI as inevitable and unquestionable. But when we apply a sociotechnical thinking, we see AI for what it really is. It's a complex system. It's built by people. It's shaped by institutions, and it's embedded with values. And this is going to set us up now for a module tool for 2, where we look at what AI actually is: machine learning, predictive text, generative models, and then how those work at a conceptual level.